Welcome back to Real Crime Story Time with Jill. I hope everybody's doing okay. It's getting a little tough, but we got to do the right thing and try to keep ourselves entertained. And on that note, I got a couple stories for you tonight. The first one, I wasn't even out of law school yet. I had gotten an internship in the prosecutor's office in Detroit. And one of the things I got to do was go from courtroom to courtroom to learn about how different attorneys tried their cases. Did you get yourself something to drink yet? Because I got me a little something. It's just cranberry juice. But get yourself something and get the kids out the room. Remember, this isn't for children. So one day I went into a courtroom and there was a trial just starting, but it was a bench trial. So there was no jury, just a judge. The judge was going to make the decision. The charge was larceny from a person, which is just plain old stealing from somebody, stealing their wallet, stealing their purse, stealing their coat, whatever. And the person that was on trial was this young woman, and she was represented by a young attorney who was very good looking then and now. He's still really good looking. And the person who claimed that she had stolen from him was an older gentleman. This older gentleman came into the courtroom with his skinny tie and his white shirt and his nice suit. And he was probably in his, I'd say, early 60s, very proper. Took off his hat, put it on his lap, smoothed out his pants and everything while he was sitting on the witness stand. He's the kind of guy that you might see at the barbershop. And when you greet him, you ask him what's up, and he says, can't call it. And he's going to say that every time you see him. He can't call it, and he never will. Now, the prosecution, in this case, they got to show two things. That the young lady took something from the man, and that she did not have permission to take that something. Well, and they also had to prove the amount that she took from him. So it's a felony, not a misdemeanor. So the old man's up there getting ready to testify, and the prosecutor gets up there and asks him some very basic questions. Have you seen this woman before? Yes. Where did you see her? I saw her on Woodward Avenue on such and such a date. Did you have any personal contact with her? Yes. Where did you go with her? Where, if any place, did you go with her? And they had gone to some motel up on 8 Mile. And then the prosecutor asked how much money he had with him that day. And the man told him, and it was his whole entire check. It was a Friday, and he had just cashed his check. So he had quite a bit of money on him at the time. Well, the prosecutor asked the man if he was alone with the woman in the motel room, and the man said yes. And you had your money with you at that time? Yes. There came a point when you fell asleep? Yes. Who was in the room when you fell asleep? Just me and her. When you woke up, did you still have that amount of money? No. How much money did you have? None. She took it all, took my whole entire check. Now, this man, even though he had been victimized by this woman, or he claimed to have been victimized by this woman, he was still very polite, and he never referred to her in a negative way. He referred to her as the young lady. In fact, everybody in the room knew that this woman was a prostitute, and she was a young lady. And I really appreciated the fact that this man spoke respectfully of her. Well, then it's the defense's turn to cross-examine the man. And when you're a defense attorney, really what you need to know first and foremost is when to stop talking. When to stop. If the prosecution hasn't proven all of the elements of the crime that's charged, then you don't need to say much. You need to sit down. Well, in this case, the prosecution had forgotten to prove that the woman did not have permission to take the man's money. Proved that they were together. She got the money, great amount of money, felony money, but they hadn't asked the man if the woman had permission. So the defense attorney, who was did I say he was good looking? He was very good looking. Still is. He gets up, and I got the impression that he was going to try to be cute with this man, because he opens with a question with all these big, long, legalese kind of words. Now, this man had testified that he had worked at Mr. Henry Ford's plant for 40 some odd years. Anybody who refers to the factory as Mr. Henry Ford's plant is old school. And that's just how the old timers refer to it. These days, somebody will say, oh, I work at Ford's. Not Ford. I work at Ford's. But this man said the whole thing, Mr. Henry Ford's plant. So he was old school, and he probably lost some hearing in all those years working on the assembly line. So this attorney starts out asking this long question about, isn't it true, sir, that you and my client, Miss So-and-so here, had reached an agreement within which you were supposed to provide her with certain legal tender in exchange for certain personal services? And the man was like, what? What? And the attorney kept repeating it. And he had every chance to just sit down because he was going to win. They hadn't proven that she took the money without permission. But he keeps going. And the old man is confused and he can barely hear him. And finally, the judge jumps in and says, counsel, could we move this along? Maybe if you broke up your question or simplified your question a little bit. But then the old man speaks up and he says, oh, wait a minute. I think I know what you're saying. I understand. Well, yeah, I was trying to buy some pussy, but I wasn't trying to buy no $1,011 worth of pussy. And I thought I would die. Everybody cracked up. The judge fell out. He gave us a minute to collect ourselves, and then they went on and finished the trial, and she was convicted. The next story, let me get a little sip of my cranberry juice. Very refreshing. The next story is about a murder case that I had years ago, and I was court appointed on this case. To me, people give court-appointed attorneys a lot of stuff about how they're no good and you want somebody who knows you and you want a paid lawyer. You don't want no free lawyer. Well, that's not necessarily true because I know a whole lot of lawyers that were court-appointed and like to win. And I was one of those lawyers where I'm like, I want to win. I don't care if we play in jacks. I don't care if it's a trial. I don't care if it's getting to a parking space. I want to win. So anyway, I'm going to see my client and looking at the paperwork that I had just gotten from the clerk's office. And I see that the top sheet says that this person, whose name is Sander, is a male. But it says the cause of death was stabbing. Well, that didn't make sense to me because in Detroit, at that time anyway, I don't know how it is now, but back then, a woman would cut you. A man, if he's going to kill you, he's going to shoot you. So I thought, okay, I still don't really know that this is a man. It says it's a man. I don't believe it. So I flipped through some of the paperwork. And sure enough, in the statement that my client gave and in the police reports, they refer to this person as a woman. Now, this is important because I got to figure out which jail I'm going to. One jail has all men and maybe a few women. The other jail is the women's jail. So now I know which building to go to. So I go to the right building, go through the routine. I'm waiting in the visiting cell for them to bring me my client. And they bring me this tiny old lady. She might have been 5'2", 5'3". She did not weigh more than 120 pounds. And she's got her hair in two big French braids, and she's very soft-spoken, and her hair is mostly gray. So she comes in, and we start talking. I want to go over her statement with her because she made a statement. Now, I hadn't read her statement until then. And as I read it, it was all I could do not to laugh, because here's what happened. She was living in this hotel that was like the last stage before homelessness. And she was living with her younger boyfriend. He was maybe 15, 20 years younger than her. Well, she said they always argued because he didn't want to take his medication. And she was always trying to get him to take his medication. So they would argue about that, especially when he had been drinking. So on this fateful night, they were arguing, or she said, we got to arguing. They got to arguing about whether he would take his medication. You're not my mama. Don't you tell me what to do. And he had been drinking, as usual, she said. He had been drinking. But then, according to her statement, he called her a bitch. Well, she didn't do anything. She let that one go. Because she said she knew he had been drinking and he didn't really mean that. And, she was just going to let that one go. Then he called her a stupid bitch. And she said, well, I know I ain't stupid, so why get all heated about that? I mean, I ain't stupid. He just drunk. He don't know what he's talking about. Then he called her an ugly bitch. And she said, well, I really don't keep myself up like I used to. I used to be cute, but I don't keep myself up like I used to. So he might have a point on that one. But she said in her statement that she told him then that she wasn't going to be too many more bitches for him and that he better get his shit together. So they kept arguing, and then he called her an old bitch, and that's when she cut him. So she hit him with the knife. She stabbed him on his hip, and he actually bled to death. She didn't even know she had cut him that badly. In her statement, she said that she went down the hall to say goodbye to somebody who was moving out of the motel, moving in with family. And when she came back to her room, the boyfriend was laid out on the floor with his eyes rolled back in his head. And she stepped over him to get to the phone to call 911. And as she stepped over him, she said, "Why didn't you say something? I didn't know I cut you that bad." And she did call 911, and she ran at first, but she came back, and that's how she was arrested. So toward the end of the visit, I start flipping through her paperwork to talk about her priors and how any prior convictions that she might have could affect this case. Well, lo and behold, she's got another homicide, an old homicide, like maybe, let's say 15, 20 years ago. So I asked her, but it doesn't have any details. It just lists the crime and the statute number and the year. So I asked her, well, was that case anything like this case? Because if you do something now that is very similar to something that you did years ago, then the prosecution can introduce that old crime, because the argument is this is just what you do. This is a pattern of behavior, and they can introduce that kind of evidence. So that's why I was asking her, well, was that old case anything like this case? And she said, oh, no, it was different. It was different. I said, okay, I can get the police report, but because it's going to say what happened, but you tell me what happened. And she said, well, I was living with this man. He was my age, and he used to put his hands on me, and I kept telling him, don't you put your hands on me again. But I stayed with him, and I was stupid, and I was in love. But one night he came home with one of his friends, and they had been drinking, and he got mad because I hadn't fixed them something to eat. Well, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't know what time he was coming in. So he gets mad, and he decides that he gonna hit me. And this time I fought back. And when we got to tussling, we was on the steps. And everybody knew he carried a knife right here in his front pocket. And so I pushed him, and he fell down them steps. And that's how he must have got poked a couple times, because he got stabbed 3, 4, 5 times. And I tried to explain that to my lawyer. She acted like she didn't believe me. But that's what I told her happened. And the jury, that's what we told the jury. And I said, the jury didn't believe you, huh? And she said, no, they didn't believe me. So she had done some time for that other homicide. And I told her they're going to be able to bring that one in. They're going to be able to tell the judge or the jury about that old case, because same pattern, the live-in lover, a knife, and he's dead. So yeah, that's going to come into evidence. So then we're done with like the real professional part of this, and I'm getting ready to go. And I told her, I said, you know, Sander, I just got to know, this new man who just died, had you ever told him about what happened with that other man? And she said, girl, no. And that was Sander. And Sander ended up doing a little bit of time. She pled guilty and got to a lesser offense. And she got a few years, but she is one of my more memorable clients. Now, I hope that while we're all locked up and on quarantine or self-isolation, whatever the hell you want to call it, that you're being kind to one another, that you're being kind to yourself, and that you're being careful. Wash your hands, wash your hands. Everybody got to leave the house to go get groceries or something. Wash your hands and be careful, because this is real. I've got several people in my life who have this COVID-19 virus now. It's very serious stuff. Take care. I'll see you next time.